those guys are, but I love them. Some kind of Sephardic group of friends just singing some Shavua Tov songs. Shavua Tov, my holy sisters and brothers. A good week to you, a good vach in Yiddish. How you doing? Let's get this week off with a bang by studying together. That was Avihai Rodriguez that I found on YouTube and his pals. If you know Avihai Rodriguez, tell him that I love when he and his friends get together to start off a week after Shabbos with a bang. Let's light up the darkness. All right, and by the way, that was recorded in 2017. I'm not saying that Avihai and his friends are getting together when they shouldn't be. Who's with us on this great Saturday night? Sharon Fran Brooks says Shavua Tov and Hodesh Tov from Lebanon, New Jersey. Correct, Hodesh Tov. We're starting the new Hebrew month of Heshvan. It starts tonight, Rosh Hodesh tonight, and officially tomorrow. Beautiful. A new month is upon us. Vaughn Billow says Shalom from Fremont, Ohio. Tom says Shavua Tov. Carlos says Shabbat Shalom. Guy is with us from Dayton, Ohio. Mark from American Fork in Utah. Handona Bizamat says Hodesh Tov. Patrice Carter from Utah. Ann from Big Valley, California. George says beautiful. Ronnie with us from Cerritos. Jacob says Shavua Tov. Bill says Shavua Tov. Rachel Murphy says great to see you jiving. Sorry I missed it. Stephanie Marie Diaz says good Hodesh Tov. Rochelle Rosen Hodesh Tov. Tom Hodesh Tov. And Nancy is with us from Detroit, Michigan. Let's see, have we caught up on the YouTube side? Not quite yet. All right. Let's get busy. We've got some work to do. Where are we holding? We're in Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 6 and still discussing the first Mishna. It's been about a week. Tomorrow, with God's help, we'll complete that discussion of the first Mishnah in chapter 6. We're on Daf Samech Ches, that's page 68 of Tractate Eruvin. Yesterday, we always have our Friday show at noon because Shabbos comes in Friday evening. We were discussing the case, the incident when there was a bris, the celebration of a circumcision, welcoming a new Jewish boy into the covenant of the Jewish people that stretches all the way back to Abraham. They were celebrating a bris milah, a circumcision, in the neighborhood where Rabba and Abaye lived. So recall that Rav Yosef and Rabba were contemporaries. They were colleagues. They were very, very close friends. They disputed matters of law in many, many cases and argued passionately and vociferously, but they were very, very good friends. Rav Yosef sort of stepped aside when it came time to promote one of them to become the leader of the Jewish community in Pumbedisa, which is in Babylonia. Rav Yosef said, you take it, to Rabba. Rabba became the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the academy, and occupied that position for 20 years. When he died, Rav Yosef then assumed that leadership for 2 years. He was already very old, but he was a very effective leader. And then he passed on. And then eventually their mutual student, Abaye, would become the head of that community. These are all great, great sages. And then Abaye's, let's just stick with them. And what's interesting about this is that as much as we're going to learn about their opinions of law on these matters, we're also getting a little bit of a peek into their personal lives here because this happened in their neighborhood where they actually lived. So Rabba and Abaye lived quite near each other. They were neighbors. They didn't live next door to each other, but in the same neighborhood. And so what happened was somebody in that neighborhood, had a baby. The boy was scheduled to have his circumcision on the 8th day. The circumcision is always done on the 8th day, if possible, and even if it's on Shabbos, right? So doing a surgical procedure is something we would not normally do on Shabbos, if at all possible. This is not a life-saving emergency. For any emergency, we override the restrictions of Shabbos. But the bris doesn't have to be performed on the 8th day. Nevertheless, it's an important Torah commandment. and so it does override Shabbos. However, if a baby is sick for some reason, if it's jaundice, there's a lot of reasons why you might postpone for health reasons the circumcision. Then once it's not an 8th day circumcision, we do it on the first day that the baby is healthy enough to have the circumcision. But if the first day is Shabbos, then we don't do it. It's no longer an 8th day circumcision, so we'll wait till the first day that the baby's healthy, and it's not Shabbos. In this incident, it was an 8th day baby. They were going to do it on Shabbos. Now, at that time, the way that this sort of medical procedure worked is that it was understood that for the sake of the baby's health, he needed to be bathed in warm water before and after the circumcision. So they had to have warm water available. They would heat up the water on Friday before Shabbos and then just kind of insulate it and keep it warm. And then the water would be there and be ready for the circumcision on Shabbos. But what happened in this incident, as we heard yesterday, is that the water spilled. So they didn't have warm water. And now they were going to have to postpone the circumcision, which they really didn't want to do, unless they could replace the warm water. Now, they're not going to be able to heat up the water on Shabbos. The permit doesn't go that far. But if they already had some warm water available and it was nearby, okay, so then they could just bring the warm water over to the baby's house. And indeed, that is what Rabba said to do. Bring the water from my house. I have warm water in my house. So now Rabba at this time is the head of the academy. He's like the most prominent rabbi in Pumbedisa. He has a large household. You know, he's well-to-do. He happens to have warm water available. Bring the warm water from my house. His disciple, his student, Abaye, who would eventually become the head of the Jewish community in that town, and a great sage. Abaye's rulings are all over the Talmud. But at this time, he's younger. We already have recorded, his arguments and his rulings, even as a young person. But at this time, he's in the role of just serving Rava, right? He's already making rulings, but, Rava is for sure in charge. So Abaye says to Rava, I'm sorry, but we don't have an eruv in the courtyard. And Rava says, okay, we're going to rely on the shituf. So the shituf is the merging of alleyways, right? So an eruv is sort of merging the ownership of houses within a courtyard. And then the sort of larger eruv, which is called a shituf, is the merging of alleyways. In other words, that there's a few alleyways that are next to each other, and we're going to sort of take a collection of food from the various alleyways, right? Because an alleyway is going to be adjusted so that various courtyards can carry, right? So in each courtyard, there's multiple homes. They collect some food from each home into a basket, deposit that basket in one of the homes in the courtyard. Now there are several courtyards that open onto one alleyway, and so that people can carry in the alleyway, they're going to take a collection from each of the courtyards, deposit it in one of the courtyards, in a house in one of the courtyards, and now all the residents whose houses open into courtyards that open into the alleyway can now carry on Shabbos in and out of their houses in their own courtyards and between the courtyards by going through that alleyway that has now been adjusted with this thing called the shituf, the merging of alleyways. Kind of like an eruv, just for a little bit larger area. And then there's a larger shituf, which is merging alleyways, right? So that multiple alleyways you're going to be able to carry throughout them. Now we're getting closer to sort of our modern version of a neighborhood eruv or a citywide eruv if the city is enclosed in some way. That's the general idea that we're talking about. So even though there's not an eruv in that courtyard, because of the pressing circumstance, says Rabba, we can rely on the merging, the shituf of the alleyways, the merging of the alleyways in this area so that we can carry and perform this biblical mitzvah of doing the circumcision on the 8th day. Abaye says, I'm sorry, we don't have a shituf for these alleyways. So then Rabba says, all right, in that case, let's ask a non-Jew to bring the warm water from my house for us. The non-Jew is not bound by these laws. He can bring it for us. Abaye starts to say, but, and then Rav Yosef, who is his teacher, just like Rabba is his teacher, and Abaye is on the same level as Rabba, except Rabba is a little higher because he's been promoted to be the head of the academy. Rav Yosef says to Abaye, shh, stop, no more objections. And then so they relied on Rabba's instruction that they found a non-Jew who would bring the warm water from his house, and they performed the circumcision and everybody celebrated. After the celebration, Rav Yosef said to Abaye, okay, what is it that you wanted to object? You understand that I didn't let you object at that time because in that situation, we're talking about a rabbinic decree, not a biblical law, bringing water from one place to another. This is only going to be prohibited by rabbinic decree. The whole law of eruv is by rabbinic decree. And in a matter such as that, you can rely on an authority and you bring up your objections afterwards. This is a ruling of Rav Kahana. If what had been suggested was a leniency that might violate a biblical prohibition, then everybody who has an objection raise it before, we do that action to make sure that there's nothing wrong with it. But when the only thing that's being violated is rabbinic prohibition, we're going to be more lenient. And since it's an authority who's like Rabba, who's saying that bring the water, you can talk about it afterwards and see if it was done correctly. So now it's afterwards. So Rav Yosef says to Abaye, well, what were you going to object? And Abaye says, well, we've learned elsewhere that in terms of somebody who touches a human corpse and contracts corpse tuma, right, ritual impurity by virtue of touching a human corpse, he needs to be sprinkled with the waters of sprinkling. These kind of things actually only existed at the time that the temple was standing. We no longer do this. But at any rate, the law is the law. And he says that the sprinkling, which needed to be done on the third and seventh day, the rabbis decreed that we don't do that on Shabbos. We wait until after Shabbos. So if for that rabbinic decree, we don't violate the decree in favor of Shabbos in order to enhance the sanctity of Shabbos, why are we violating the rabbinic decree against asking a non-Jew to do a Shabbos labor that is prohibited for a Jew to do? We can't do that. You can't ask a non-Jew to do something that you yourself are prohibited to do. If he does it for you because he understands that you have a need, and he's just doing you a favor because he wants to be nice and help you and take care of you, that's great. But you can't ask him to do it because then you're making him your agent in performing that action, and then it's just as bad as if you did it yourself. So Abaye says, how come we don't put aside that rabbinic prohibition on sprinkling to be as part of the purification process when we've touched a corpse? We don't do that on Shabbos. Why are we going to put this rabbinic prohibition aside? And Rav Yosef said to him, well, there's a big difference here. There's a very big difference, because the only thing that Rabba asked the non-Jew to do is to bring the water that was already heated. So it's a rabbinic prohibition that we don't ask a non-Jew to do what we ourselves are prohibited to do. And it's a rabbinic prohibition not to carry the water from one courtyard to another. As we've been learning, where the rabbis decreed that was it was not permitted unless the eruv had been created. So it's a rabbinic prohibition on a rabbinic prohibition. And Rabba didn't ask the non-Jew to please go and heat the water. The water was already warm. If he had said to him, please heat water for us, then it would not have worked and your objection would be correct. But that's not the case here. That's the story that we heard yesterday. On today's daf, we pick up at the end of that story with Rabba bar Rav Hanan, another sage in the area, who heard this whole story on Monday, let's say, right? Monday at the office, Monday at the academy, he heard this whole thing that went down on Shabbos when they tried to do that bris in the neighborhood where Rabba and Abaye lived. And his question was, are you telling me that in an alley where the great sages, Rabba and Abaye, so Abaye's younger, but he's already considered a great sage, In the neighborhood where the great sages Rabba and Abaye live, you don't have an eruv in the courtyard and you don't have a shituf in the alley? Why haven't you taken care of business and made sure that the courtyards were merged in the alleyway, etc.? Why haven't you done that? That's crazy. We've already established that it's a good thing to make an eruv because everybody benefits and they can enjoy Shabbos more, and situations like this would not come up. Why haven't you taken care of that? Says Rabba bar Rav Chanan. And Abaye says, well, to tell you the truth, Rabba, he's the head of the academy, okay? It's not his nature to go around the residents of the courtyards that open into this alley and ask the people to deposit a little bit of food in the communal basket so that we have the merging of the alleyway established. So it would naturally fall to me to do that. But I'm so busy with my studies that I'm not going to walk around and ask everybody to deposit food. And the rest of the people who live where we live, they don't bother to do it, you know? He's not saying that they're not pious, they're not religious. Like, I guess no one cares. No one cared to create an eruv in the alley where Rabba and Abaye live, right? That the other residents don't care. Rabba, it's beneath his station, truly beneath his station to be the one to do this. Abaye is maybe making excuses. He thinks maybe I should have done it, but I've been so busy with my studies that I didn't do it. So then Rabba bar Rav Hanan says to him, okay, I understand you've been busy. It makes sense to me. But why don't you just assign some of the bread in your basket to the residents of the other courtyards? You don't have to go around and have that conversation with everybody in the neighboring courtyards. You could just assign some of the bread that's already in your basket to them. You can transfer ownership to them by just making that declaration like you're giving it to them. And then it's like they deposited some bread in your basket that's being kept in your house, and that will accomplish the merging of courtyards around this alley. And Abaye, the great sage Abaye, whose name is all over the Talmud, whose names we mention constantly when we're sharing rulings of law, from the Talmud, Abaye says, I can't do that because I'm so poor that there has to be enough bread in the basket that if people actually came, it's not that they're gonna come, but if they did come and say, I'd like to get some bread out of my basket, right? It's their bread. The way an eruv works is people have to deposit their food in the basket. So you can't just be so nominal about it that there's not enough bread there that if people came and asked for it, that they couldn't take it. They're not going to come and take it, but there has to be enough bread there for that to be possible. And Abaye said, the reality is, I'm so poor that if I assign some of the bread in my basket to other people, if they were to come and ask for it, I wouldn't have enough bread for myself. I literally don't have enough bread in my basket that I could make even this theoretical assignment of some of my bread to the other residents of the courtyard. That's how poor he was, right? It's not like it paid big money to be a sage. And of course, what he was dedicated to, Abaye was the type of person who was studying and learning 18 hours a day. He really wasn't concerned about material possessions at all. Eventually, when he became head of the academy, they would sort of force him to take some money and wealth and have some privilege and esteem simply because he would need to host events for the other sages. And it just like, in order to host those events, he needed to be prepared to do that. But at this point in his life, Rabba was the head of the academy. Abaye was only concerned about his studies. And that's how poor he was. So Rabba bar Rav Hanan said, okay, I understand you don't have enough bread in your basket, but surely you've got some vinegar in your house. Everybody has a small barrel of vinegar in their house. Why don't you just assign a portion of the vinegar that's in your barrel to the residents of the courtyard, right? Because everyone has that much vinegar around. You have enough that you can do that, and we can make an eruv for the purpose of merging alleyways, even with vinegar. Abaye says, but there's a baraisa which teaches that we may not use food in a storeroom to create the merging of alleyways. And Rabba bar Rav Hanan says, well, wait a minute, I have a different baraisa which says that we may use food in the storeroom in order to create a merging of the alleyways. And Rav Oshaya explained why there are two baraisas which seem to directly contradict one another, that we may use food in a storeroom and assign its ownership to the other members, the other courtyards that live around the alleyway, in order to create the merging of courtyards around the alleyway, and a baraisa which says we may not assign food in our storeroom for that purpose. And the way we reconcile those two is that one of them follows Beis Shammai that says there is no retroactive designation of ownership, or no retroactive designation, period. And the baraisa which says that we can assign this ownership to the other peoples follows Beis Hillel, which says we may do retroactive designation. We're going to unpack that and make it clear what's going on. So what is this retroactive designation? So for this case, what it means is that I'm just saying that a portion of the food in my storeroom, it's like I'm assigning ownership to these people. And if they should ever come and collect it and ask for that piece of food, which they have the right to do, then the piece that I give them at that moment is the piece that I assigned to them when I made this designation so that we could all merge the courtyards around the alleyway. I don't literally take food out of my storeroom and put it in a corner never to be touched. I'm just saying a portion of my food is assigned to them, and if they should ever come and collect it, what I give them at that point is what I designated as their portion today when I make that assignment. According to Beis Shammai, the followers of the Academy of Shammai, you're not allowed to do that. And according to the followers of Hillel, the Academy of Hillel, Beis Hillel, you are allowed to do that. Were Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai talking about merging alleyways when they said you may or you may not engage in retroactive designation? No, they were talking about moving a corpse out of a house. Let us explain. When a person dies in a house, right? So let's say, God willing, a person lived a long and full and beautiful life. They're 120 years old and they die on their birthday. That's the ultimate. That's like Moses. You live to 120 and die on your birthday. That's beautiful. That's as much as we can hope for in this world, to have such a long life. And one who dies on his birthday is considered really beloved of God, a great righteous person. That has nothing to do with this teaching. I'm just adding that. So, but let's say a person dies in the house. Now, at the moment that a human turns into a corpse, when the soul leaves the body, that corpse imparts corpse tuma, ritual impurity, throughout the interior of that house. The house now has corpse tuma inside it. It's also called tent tuma, right? Or corpse in a tent. When a human dies in a tent, it's the same thing. And so that's going to require going through a certain kind of purification process. Now, what's interesting about this is really what becomes impure is not really the whole house, but it's like, imagine a one-room house, and I'm not sure exactly how it works with like different rooms within the house. Maybe all the rooms that have doors open between where the corpse is and where that room is. But the bottom line is that all of the entrances of the house also become tameh, also become ritually impure, even though they don't directly connect with the corpse. In other words, what they're saying is, let's say there's a front porch and a back porch, right? And the doors are closed, but eventually that corpse is going to be removed from the house. And when it gets removed from the house, it's going to pass through either the front porch or the back porch, and it's like a covered porch. So because of that roof that's over the porch, when it goes out through the entrance, that area under the little awning over the front door or the back door, that's also going to become a ritually impure area. As soon as the corpse dies, even though the doors are closed, it's considered that all of the entrances become tameh, become ritually impure. If you open one of the doors, so it's clear you're going to go out, you're going to remove the corpse from the house through that door, okay, then that entrance is going to be regarded as being impure, and the one that remained closed stays pure. That area does not become ritually impure. So Beis Shammai says that designation of which door you're going to take the corpse out of the house from, you have to make it before the person dies. Right? Because as soon as the person dies and becomes a corpse, both of the entrances are automatically, acquire this corpse impurity, right? Corpse in a house impurity. Unless you opened one of those doors before the person died. Beis Hillel say you can even open the door after the person dies, because what you're making is a retroactive designation that you always intended, even at the time, even before the person died, that when you were going to remove the corpse from the house, it was going to go through this door, which you're opening now after the person died. So that's where we get that concept of retroactive designation. And indeed, the law does allow for retroactive designation. The halacha follows Beis Hillel in this matter, and therefore, when we bring this principle of law back to the situation of poor Abaye in his neighborhood and the courtyards that open on the alleyway where he lives, he can assign some of the vinegar in his storeroom to be owned by other members of the neighborhood, and if they should ever come and claim their vinegar that he gave them, and that what he takes out at that moment is assumed to be retroactively designated as what he meant to give them at the time that he assigned their portion of ownership in the vinegar barrel. Hope you could follow that. That's as clear as I can make it. Okay, so that is the case of why now Abaye can, the next time this comes up in their neighborhood, he can say to Rava, yes, the alleyways have been merged because I assigned some of the vinegar in my storeroom to all the residents for their ownership. And now we can all carry, not only in our courtyards, but into the alleys as well on Shabbos. Okay, that's that ruling. Okay, another incident having to do with a circumcision and the water spilling. There was another time they were going to do a circumcision on Shabbos and the water for the baby spilled. Same situation, but in a different neighborhood. This happened not in Rabba's neighborhood, but in Rava, V as in Victor, in Rava's neighborhood. Now, Rava lived in a different kind of situation. There's a higher end neighborhood, right? So Rava's well-to-do. He lives in a private courtyard. There's just one house in his courtyard. And next door, there's another private courtyard that only has one house in it. Now, as we've learned, when there's only one house in an enclosure, in an enclosed courtyard, no eruv is necessary. You can carry in and out of your house on Shabbos because nobody else has rights in that courtyard. Now, there was an opening in the wall between these two courtyards. That opening allows them, if they want to create an eruv, depositing some food in a basket in one of the courtyards, so that they could carry back and forth between the two courtyards. However, they had not established such an eruv before Shabbos. So now the water for the baby spilled in where the baby lives in the courtyard next to Rava's courtyard. They don't have an eruv so that they can carry between the courtyards. But as we've learned, what is possible to do on Shabbos is that one of the residents renounces his rights in this potential eruv, and now the other people, it's like there's only one resident for both courtyards, and they can carry water back and forth. They can go get the warm water that's in Rava's house and bring it through the opening in the wall between the courtyards to where the baby's house is, and they can perform the circumcision on Shabbos. So Rava says, okay, I'm going to renounce my rights in this, in these two courtyards, in my own courtyard and whatever right I might have in your courtyard. And so now you'll be able to go to my house and get warm water out of my house and bring it here. Okay, carry the water out of my house into my courtyard, through the opening in the wall, through your courtyard and into your house. Because I'm renouncing rights in my own courtyard, Rava says, I don't want to make a mistake and come to carry some object out of my house into my own courtyard. I've renounced that right. I can no longer carry objects in and out of my house, even into my own private courtyard on this Shabbos. Like after Shabbos, we'll fix this up. But during this Shabbos, I can't carry stuff in and out of my house. So he asked his attendants, please move all of my loose belongings that are in the outer room of my house into a deeper room in my house, so that by mistake, I won't make the mistake of picking up one of those objects and come to carry it into my courtyard and violate the prohibition of carrying from my house into my courtyard after I've renounced my rights. So that's what Rav is doing. He's being generous. He's making it possible for them to do the bris. And he's then being a little extra careful so that he won't come to violate the law of eruv by mistake. So Ravina is present at this bris and sees what Rava is doing, and presumably after the circumcision, for the same reason that Rav Yosef told Abaye not to speak up before, right? Because there's an authority here, and Rav is certainly an authority, and this is having to do with law of eruv. So after the circumcision goes down and everybody celebrates, Ravina pulls Rava aside, and he says, didn't Shmuel say that we can't renounce our rights from one courtyard to another, right? According to Shmuel, you can renounce the rights in your own courtyard, but you can't renounce those rights in favor of somebody who lives in a different courtyard than your own courtyard. This would only work if the house where the baby's circumcision was going to happen shared the same courtyard with your house. This doesn't work between courtyards, according to Shmuel. And as we saw, the law does not follow Shmuel. Some people follow Shmuel, but generally the halacha does not follow Shmuel in this matter. And indeed, Rava's answer to Ravina is, I don't hold by Shmuel. I hold by Rabbi Yochanan, who says that we may renounce rights from one courtyard to another. Ravina said, well, if so, that you don't hold like Shmuel, then you have no problem. You're not going to have to deal with this whole thing for the rest of Shabbos, where you can't carry any object out of your house into your courtyard. Because you renounce your rights from one courtyard to another. They carry the water over to their house. They make the bris. The bris is over. The party's over. They can renounce those rights back to you. And you're back where you were when you started. Rava says, in this, I do hold like Shmuel, that we may not renounce rights on Shabbos to somebody else, and then they renounce it back to us. Ravina says, but wait a minute, isn't the reason that Shmuel says we don't renounce in one direction and then renounce it back afterward, that once you've removed yourself from the courtyard, legally speaking, because you renounced your rights, that so now the reason that they can't give you the rights back is because you're not in this courtyard anymore. Even though you're living there, it's like you've left the courtyard because you renounced your rights. And so according to Shmuel, the reason that they can't renounce the rights back to you is because you're no longer in this courtyard. And Rava says, no. That is not the reason that Shmuel said we don't renounce rights in one direction and then back the other way, and nor the reason why I hold like Shmuel in this regard. The reason that Shmuel and I hold this way, that we don't renounce rights in one direction and then renounce them back on the same Shabbos, is that if we do that, people will come to mock the rulings of the sages. They'll think it's a little bit ridiculous, right? That we could just pass the rights back and forth, then sort of as needed. When I need to carry something over there, hey, Joe, you renounce your rights to me? Yeah, I renounce. And then I carry. And then after that, when I'm done carrying, I say, hey, Joe, here's your rights back. And then he could carry. And people might come to think that we're not taking this matter seriously. So even though legalistically speaking it would work, we don't do that because of the appearance of, silliness, right? The appearance of being a little bit too cavalier with the transfer of rights on Shabbos. That's what I've got for us today. I'm sorry I didn't give you the warning 5 minutes ago. But if you've got comments and questions, this is the time for it. And let's see if Nina has collected any for me. Here we go. Bill Eldridge. Good heavens! But the House of Shammai's ruling sounds a bit curt. I can see why the law followed Hillel. Imagine having to put a codicil in your will about which door to take your remains out of, right? I mean, Beis Shammai, generally speaking, are more correct than Beis Hillel, right? When you get right down to it, from a legal point of view, usually Beis Shammai's rulings make more logical sense. But Beis Hillel's rulings are usually a little bit kinder, right? A little bit more easygoing. And plus, as we know, the reason that generally the law follows Beis Hillel wasn't even about the rulings themselves, but the manner in which the scholars of Beis Hillel attended to these issues, right? That they would always state the rulings of Beis Shammai before their own. Right? And they would always state the rulings of the other side, and they would even state them before their own. And they were more easygoing. And this was important, not just because they were nice guys, but because if you're more open to the rulings that seem to go against you, the rulings of the other side, the people across the aisle, then there's actually going to be sort of more truth revealed in a more open and civil discussion. And as a population, we have a better chance to arrive at the truest ruling when we're careful to learn and understand and even transmit the rulings of people that we disagree with. And Tom comments, one wonders if Hillel or one of his students based the ruling on how the people were doing things. Right. In other words, sometimes we've seen that the sages will go a certain way in figuring out what the law should be according to logic and according to the tradition, but then they will also go out and inspect what the people are doing. Because there's also an understanding among the sages that if the people have gone a really long way and sort of created an established tradition among themselves, and this could be in a particular town, right, where they're not violating the law, they're just doing it differently than in other towns, and then a new sage comes to town and wants to change the way they've been doing things, if what they're doing is actually legal but sort of just not the way that the biggest authority in this generation has said to do it elsewhere, they're going to be reticent to change what they're doing in this locality because the people might not listen. And if sages issue a ruling which the people just won't follow, that actually lowers the authority of the sages, and that's something they don't want to do, right? So they were very much living in the real world. However, even these it's important to understand that they'll be more easygoing. They're going to check with what the people are really doing. They're going to, especially in the area of rabbinic decrees, they're going to look for leniencies. As we've seen in the laws of eruv, they will really go out of their way to find leniencies so that people can have a maximum enjoyment of Shabbos. But we should not be led to think that they were wishy-washy about rabbinic decrees. They'll go as far as they can to create a leniency, but they won't go outside of what they deem to be right? What is God's will according to the tradition and how it's been established by the greatest authorities. And with each generation, they consider that it's the new generation has less authority than the previous generation. So overturning established laws is very rare. It was rare then, and how much rarer is it now 2,000 years later? We have very, very much respect for how the earlier authorities put down the law. Where we get new rulings, and of course there are new rulings all the time, but they're new rulings because there are new situations, novel situations that just didn't exist before. Right, especially in the realm of technology. When there's new technologies, questions are asked that the sages just couldn't have imagined, and then the question becomes, how can we apply an established legal principle to a new situation? That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow on Sunday, 6 p.m. Pacific. And tomorrow, finally, with God's help, we'll be on page 70 of Tractate Eruvin, and we will finally finish with God's help, I say. Whenever I talk about the future, I will only say that, God willing, or with God's help. Because the future, who knows? You want to make God laugh? Tell him what's going to happen in the future. But with God's help, we'll complete our discussion of the first Mishna of chapter 6 and open the second Mishna tomorrow. Have a great evening. Have a great week. A Chodesh Tov, a good week, a good Vach, and a good month. A Chodesh Tov, because we're just starting the new Hebrew month of Cheshvan.